In 1912, Bishop James Morrison, a Charlottetown priest, had succeeded a Bishop John Cameron who had died in 1910. This was an exciting time in the diocese as progressive clergymen like Father James J. Tompkins and Father Little Doc Hugh McPherson had begun an intellectual resurgence at St. F.X. Through the efforts like the Antigonish Forward Movement, the Casket newspaper column For the People, and the annual Rural Conference, Father Tompkins wanted Catholics to take a serious look at local economic problems and stem the vast tide of outmigration. In 1919, Tompkins helped Bishop Morrison take control of the Casket newspaper, and through funding from the Carnegie Corporation in New York City, St. F.X. created a chair in French to address Acadian grievances, and in 1921, a people's school. In 1922, however, Father Tompkins became embroiled in a dispute with Bishop Morrison over a Maritime University Federation scheme, and he was soon transferred to Star of the Sea Parish in Canso. While the poor economy forced thousands of young men and women from eastern Nova Scotia to outmigrate to Ontario and New England, by 1914, Antigonish Catholics began to send money to other Canadian dioceses through the Catholic Church Extension Society. There was also strong support for the Scarboro Foreign Mission Society. Diocesan funds were also used to purchase Mount Cameron Farm on the outskirts of Antigonish town, where Fathers Little Doc Hugh McPherson and Miles Tompkins turned the former retirement property into an agricultural laboratory. In search of employment, many Catholics continued to migrate into the colliery towns of Cape Breton, and the diocese created a number of new parishes like Mount Carmel and St. Agnes in New Waterford, which were organized in 1912 and 1914. In Whitney Pier, there was a great debate over the appropriateness of ethnic parishes, but in 1908, the Italians organized St. Nicholas, and in 1913, the Polish community built St. Mary's. At St. Patrick's Church in Sydney, once a beacon of Irish Catholicism, Maronite Rite Catholics worshipped under F. Louis Soib. While the diocese organized a people's school at Glace Bay, poor pay and difficult living conditions made labor-capital relations difficult through the 1920s. The coal miners' strike of March 1925 was one of the most notorious work stoppages in Canadian history and branded the Cape Breton soul. The strike served as a wake-up call for the diocese, who, along with the community, collected thousands of dollars to relieve the suffering of the striking men. The congregations of women religious continued to teach in the diocese's schools, but by 1908, the Sisters of St. Martha and Sisters of Charity had also started to work in hospitals. With a hospital in Antigonish town, by 1915, the Marthas were also ministering in St. Joseph's Hospital in Glace Bay, in 1920, the Ross Hospital in Sydney, and in 1925, St. Mary's Hospital in Inverness, while the Charities staffed the Hamilton Hospital in North Sydney. There was also work to be done among the diocese orphans and unwed mothers, who often faced social scorn. In the spring of 1917, the Marthas began to work with orphans at St. Mary's Home in Sydney, and by August 1927, the Little Flower Institute was opened at Brador as the diocesan orphanage. In August 1921, the first diocesan council of the CWL was organized at St. Ninian's Parish. Days later, a second council was formed at Sacred Heart in Sydney, and then Holy Redeemer at Whitney Pier. Most importantly, the CWL represented emerging commitment to Catholic social action in Antigonish. Both the Great War of 1914-18 and the Second World War of 1939-45 took a major toll on the diocese. In both conflicts, Catholics joined the ranks of battalions like the Cape Breton Highlanders and the 165th Acadian. In the Great War alone, some 559 Catholics from the diocese were killed in the trenches of Europe, while John Bernard Croke of St. John's Parish in New Aberdeen won the Victoria Cross. To look after the spiritual needs of these soldiers, priests like Father Donald McPherson, Father Ronald C. McGilvery, and Father Michael Gillis went to France as army chaplains. In the Second World War, young priests like Father James McIsaac and Father Michael E. McLaughlin went overseas, while Father R.C. McGilvery was appointed a brigadier general and eventually took over as a principal chaplain of the Canadian Army. Between the wars, in 1927, Father Tompkins, then in Canso, forced Ottawa to create a royal commission on the fishery. In 1928, due in part to the prodding of the Scottish Catholic Society, St. FX organized an extension department to use adult education and cooperation as a means of making people masters of their own destiny. The Antigonish movement, as extension's work was known throughout the region, made the diocese famous across the globe. Through study clubs, cooperatives, and credit unions, local Catholics, under the director of Monsignor Moses Michael Cody, took control of their own economic destinies. Through their support for this movement, Antigonish priests like Father James Boyle, Father George Landry, and Father John R. MacDonald were selected as bishops for other Canadian dioceses. There were many victories in this period. In the autumn of 1933, for example, Angus L. MacDonald was elected as Nova Scotia's second Roman Catholic premier. Yet there was also much sadness. In 1930, the Shubenacadie Indian Residential School opened at Shubenacadie, Hants County, and many of the diocese's young Mi'kmaq children were sent there as residents. Later, in 1943, many Mi'kmaq Catholics were pressured to leave their homes and relocate to either Shubenacadie or Eskasoni. Ironically, through this disastrous policy, Holy Family Parish, the first full Mi'kmaq parish, was established at Eskasoni. At the same time, the Congregation of Notre Dame operated a boarding school at Mabu, from which students of all ethnic backgrounds, including Mi'kmaq, graduated. Finally, during the Second World War, when Canada went to war with Italy, many Italian Catholics in Sydney were arrested and jailed as enemies of the state. In the 1940s, Antigonish began to modernize. By 1943, CJFX radio station was built to extend the St. FX extension message across the Maritimes, while the Ingonish Diocesan Society was organized to provide interest-free loans for young men contemplating a vocation. Recognizing the need for immigration, in 1950, Antigonish began a diocesan land settlement program that helped 110 Dutch families migrate into the region. The growing role of the laity was also evident by the 1950s. In 1950, for example, the Our Lady of Fatima Retreat House for Women was opened at coastal Seabright, Antigonish County. In 1953, a retreat center for the men of Cape Breton County was opened next to St. James Church at Gardiner Mines. And in 1954, the Villa Madonna Retreat House for Women was opened at Brador in the former orphanage building. Meanwhile, Catholics were also concerned about the care for the diocese's senior citizens. Proud of the work done at Stella Maris residence in North Sydney and St. Anthony's Home in Sydney, by 1955, the R.K. MacDonald Guest House was opened in Antigonish town. In 1954, a 2-week institute was organized in Mabu for young women interested in home economics. Known as the Mabu Experiment, Bishop John R. MacDonald once noted that if he had $1 million, he would give half of it to Mabu. In 1957, the New Glasgow Vocational School opened under the direction of the Brothers of Our Lady of Seven Sorrows to metalwork. In October 1959, Talbot House, named after a famous recovered alcoholic from Dublin, Ireland, was opened in the former Glebe House at Frenchvale, Cape Breton, as a diocesan rehabilitation center. It was, as one priest noted, an effort to put some purpose and order back into the lives of these human beings. St. FX was expanding as well. On the 8th of January 1951, the St. FX governors endorsed the proposal to establish a college at Sydney. Xavier Junior College allowed many Cape Breton students to take with a new focus on Latin America. In 1959, St. FX opened the Coady International Institute to apply the principles of the Ingonish movement in international communities.